Hello, welcome those who are joining. Say hello in the chat if you are inclined to do so, and tell me how audio and video are. Hello, Usha and Norma. Hello, Manal. Hello, AS. Welcome. Hello, Mary. Narasawan. We'll give it a few minutes for people to come in, and then we'll get started. Is this another Bhante? Nitesh Radhan. Hello, Bhante. Kumu, welcome. We're just giving it a few minutes for people to come in. Hello, Angels. Hello, Rick. Welcome. Hello, Jeffrey. Hello, Jayantha. Welcome. Hello, Louisa. All right, friends. We'll get started. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, friends. So just first announcement, I'll be covering Wednesday night teachings for the rest of this month. What does this give us? Is the 15th. So the 22nd and the 29th, I'll be covering the sessions. So 2 more after this. And then Bhante and Aya will be back at Empty Cloud, and I'll be staying there for a little bit, maybe like 10 days or so. So there'll be more people to cover, and poor Aya Subhijana won't have to cover everything by herself. But I wanted to, the last couple of times I've been doing this Wednesday session, I've been covering some pretty hardcore topics, right? Dependent origination, not self, all these quite not necessarily lofty, but harder topics. And I wanted to kind of bring it home today to something a bit more practical, a bit more pragmatic. And this is based off of a retreat that I do. And it's essentially about living the Noble Eightfold Path, which is an ancient path in the modern world. All right, so this is what the talk is going to be about today. It's going to be about how we implement the various aspects of the path, with the struggles in the world, how it's very similar to how it was 2,600 years ago, and how it might be different living the path in the modern age. So that's what we're going to discuss today. And then obviously there'll be time afterwards for a Q&A. If you have any questions, and wish to kind of flush out this discussion. So the first thing that I want to bring up is that the Noble Eightfold Path is actually a timeless path. The Buddha tells us that he did not create the Noble Eightfold Path. He said he found it. He found what was lost. This Noble Eightfold Path is extremely ancient. And all over the eons upon eons, and different Buddhas who found it and proclaimed it and brought it to the world. All kinds of people and various beings have practiced this Noble Eightfold Path. We are still in the dispensation of Gautama Buddha, from India 2,600 years ago. And the path is still very much alive and applicable in this very day and age. All this time, so many untold numbers of beings who have practiced this path. We're not so different. In some ways, our environment is different, but in many ways, we're not so different. And the Buddha uses the simile of a person who is going down a road and sees a path that's kind of overgrown and decides to explore the path and finds an ancient city that used to be very grand and populated, but is empty now. And he would go back to the king and say, "King, I found this ancient city, repopulate it again so that it can be grand again." Right? And so that's what the Buddha says that he's done. So this Noble Eightfold Path is available for all of us to practice. Indeed, the Buddha called us on an Arya Pariyesana. Arya Pariyesana means a noble quest, a noble search. He called us on a quest to develop, follow, practice, and become an avatar of this very same Noble Eightfold Path. Do you know what an avatar is? Most people probably don't. Most people these days, when they hear the word avatar, they think of those blue aliens or from those movies. I heard there was a new one that came out a year or so ago. But the word avatar is actually a very good, or maybe those of you who are our Indian friends, about avatars from Hinduism maybe. But the word avatar in English means the personification of something. Right? In Middle Ages Europe, you had the idea of being the personification of humility, of compassion, of goodwill, etc. And when we fully take on the Noble Eightfold Path, and we honestly and sincerely practice it, develop it, make it your vehicle, right? The Buddha talks about this in relation to metta and other things, to practice it diligently, then it becomes not something we do, but part of who we are. And through our actions, we personify and exemplify it. This Noble Eightfold Path is not an easy path. It goes against the flow. Maybe you've heard this in the English culture. Go with the flow, man. On one aspect, there's some good in there. It's like not to get too anxious and not too attached to things, to let it go and go with the flow. But really, and the Buddha talks about it goes against the flow. This is going with the flow of society, sensuality, the normal mode of life. Practicing the Noble Eightfold Path is an uphill, an upstream practice. Not easy, but well worth it once you see the benefits of developing this practice. So let's go through the various aspects of the Noble Eightfold Path, and we'll talk about them in terms of how the Buddha describes what this aspect is, and also the different complications or nuances of adapting this practice, this aspect of the path in the modern world. First is sammaditthi, right view. Right view is not something you automatically have and then you become, a Buddhist and you follow the Buddhist path. That's not exactly how it works. Actually, the Buddha's definition of right view is fully understanding the Four Noble Truths. There's only one kind of being who fully understands the Four Noble Truths, an awakened being. So until we're awakened, we do not have full and complete right view. We are developing our right view, right, through our practice. Most people who are born in Buddhist countries, from a young age, you're enculturated into Buddhism and you practice dana and sila and you develop faith in the Buddha. For those of us who are converts outside, our right view is a little different. We come to Buddhism for a variety of different reasons. And we come to Buddhism with a variety of levels of right view. For many of us, it might be simply that, I don't know, I don't necessarily know that I want to have a spiritual path. I'm just kind of want to do something for my anxiety, etc., etc. And this Buddha has a pretty good reputation for being a wise person. Why don't I lend an ear? Why don't I check it out just to see if it's for me? Right? That's a level of right view. Right? Because the Buddha has a good reputation for being a wise person. Maybe has some good things to say. So with that right view, you lend an ear. And then maybe you hear what is beneficial to you and it connects with you and you want to practice. And over the time of that practice, your right view increases and grows. Maybe, for the modern Western person who is more on the materialist end of things, or they came from another religion and they're kind of in many ways anti-religion, so they don't want to hear anything about devas and karma and rebirth and all these things, which are all part of right view. This is undeniable. There's no kind of wiggling out of that. Especially to the modern Western mind, these might seem to be superstitions or made up stories, etc. And this can be a hindrance to your practice. This is why I always encourage to have an open mind. You're not forced to believe in such things, but it's not good to be a cynical skeptic about it either. Being a skeptic is fine. That's somebody who questions, who doesn't necessarily think that they have all the answers. When you become cynical, that's more along the lines of when you think you just know everything and you hear something that doesn't agree with your views and you just automatically dismiss it out of hand because you know everything. Person like this will have a hard time developing right view. So it's important to have that open-mindedness. What about the second factor of the path? Samma sankappo, right intention. There's three aspects of this. First is nekkhamma sankalpa, means the intention of letting go. Bhikkhu Bodhi and some translated as renunciation, but I don't like that English word because most people, when they hear renunciation, they think of monastics. Really, at its core, what nekkhamma means is letting go, giving up, abandoning. So this is developing a mindset of being able to let go. Letting go of views, letting go of material possessions. Not necessarily letting go of it all and becoming a monastic, but going against the natural inclination to cling, to keep, to hold. Even the silliest little things. Do you really need that? Do you really need this? Do I really need to hold on so strongly to this view that it causes me to fight with everybody all the time? The second is avyapada sankalpa. This is the mindset, the intention of goodwill. This is where goodwill comes in for all beings. And the third, avihingsa sankalpa, intention of non-harming. For the most part, I think that this is a part of the path that doesn't really change, whether it's 2,600 years ago, a million years ago, or a million years from now. Because this is dealing with the mind and our intentions as to what we choose to allow in the mind. Do we want to allow and propagate and feed greed, hatred, harmfulness? Or do we want to allow and propagate letting go, goodwill, and harmlessness? I don't see that there is a difference here in time. What does the Buddha say about the Dhamma? Directly visible, unaffected by time, calling one to come and see, leading onwards to be realized by the wise. Developing skillful intentions is unaffected by time. Because the mind, culture changes, the cultural layer of people might change over thousands of years, but the mind is still the same. We're still beings with greed, hatred, and delusion. And that much hasn't changed. What about samma vacha? This is right speech. Buddha divides right speech into 4 types. And again, speech in many ways is also not that different, but also very different. I remember a time before you couldn't get on a website and yell at people from across the world and argue about all kinds of things. I was just on Buddhist Reddit and somebody said, "Are Buddhist online forums really skillful?" Right? So that much has changed about right speech, for sure. But at its core, again, right speech hasn't changed all that much. Let's go over the 4 types of right speech. First is musavada, right? Not telling a deliberate lie. Like, this is pretty straightforward, right? Not telling, refraining from telling a deliberate lie. Lying has always been, as long as we could speak, maybe even before we could speak, you could lie with your body language too. People have used the lie. Telling what is not true. And the Buddha tells us that there is one thing, bhikkhus, that if done, one could be expected to do anything else. That is to tell a deliberate lie. And when you become a meditator and you start to observe your mind, you can observe how powerful a lie is to others and also to yourself. When you really start to question everything, you start to have breakthroughs in anatta, not taking everything so personally, you start to really investigate your mind and you realize how much you're accepting justifications and lying to yourself all the time. And so then you say, no, I will not accept this lie. I will not acknowledge it. I will not feed it. Becoming as truthful as you can internally and externally. Second is Pisunaya Vachaya. This is divisive speech. The Buddha explains it as you go to this person over here and they tell you things, and then you go to that person over there and tell them, so as to divide the 2 people. See a lot of that today, don't you? A lot of division. A lot of people on all sides holding fast to their views. Things like dialogue and compromise and unity are far from people's lips. The Buddha says about Pisunaya, to be a person who delights in unity, delights in bringing people together. Speaking words that unite and don't divide can be more powerful than most people know. I think the Buddha really understood the power of speech more than most people, especially today, can understand. The power of truth is very important. And then parusaya. Parusaya is abusive speech, harsh speech, rough speech. Saying things in rough ways, cursing, etc. So we try to have, this can be misunderstood. Sometimes people think, especially in kind of modern times where, we don't want to offend people and we have to be careful with our words and things like this. This oftentimes what can be lost in there is the fact that sometimes you have to say some harsh things. The truth can hurt people sometimes. That's how it goes. But we still should try to say things in an amenable and calm and beneficial ways. So to avoid being too harsh with our speech, rough speech. And then the fourth one, as my preceptor Bhante Ji would say, is an onomatopoeia. Do you know what an onomatopoeia is? It sounds what it means. Bhante Ji would say, Sampapalapa blah 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 blah. Sampapalapa is useless speech, speech of the well. This is a good example of how the more things change, the more they stay the same. Back in the Buddha's day, and you didn't have when you didn't have plumbing, well, at least most people, some places had plumbing in people's houses and things like this, but that was a bit more rare in the ancient days. You went to the well to get your water, and while everybody was lined up at the well waiting for their turn to get their water, well, what was there to do but talk? This is speech of the well, speech about kings and wars and countries and women and politicians and all these things. Speech of the well. Useless speech. There's a modern term for that. It's called water cooler speech. There's a water cooler at work and you go to get your water and your other coworkers are there and you start yapping on about things. You find yourself in the middle of a group of people talking about, did you hear what that person did with this person? I can't believe that person did this, and see what's happening in the office, and yada 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 yada. Water cooler speech. So we want to minimize that. And so when we get on the internet, this is obviously there was no internet. Like I said, the internet didn't exist when I was young, or if it existed, it was only with, colleges, things like that. So when we are on the internet, especially on social media, sometimes we might have our names, sometimes not. Sometimes we have an anonymous name. And because there's not a person in front of you, it's a bit easier to become very unskillful. It's a bit easier because you don't have a lot of the cues, body language, reading a situation, recognizing how the words came out of your mouth, all of that. It's harder to recognize that you're being unskillful when you're online. But being online also provides us with the perfect forum for practicing right speech. When I started practicing right speech, I could, being typing up something on a social media and then looking at it as like, okay, I don't need to click send and just deleting it. Like for some reason, just typing it out was enough. And when I saw that it's unskillful, I was like, nah, delete. Right? You can do that. You can, the Buddha tells us with the son Rahula about the simile of the mirror. Right? Before you do an action, you reflect: is this action for the benefit of myself and others, or the harm of myself and others? So you can develop the skill before you click send on that social media post. Right? Do I really need to send this? You can also reflect: is this really worth my time? Getting into disputations all the time, is it really worth it? It's just wasting my time. It's not getting anywhere. I'm not convincing anybody with my wonderful oratory skills or my screaming at them and yelling at them. I'm not convincing anybody. I'm just wasting time. I am reinforcing my own views. That's what it's really about. When I'm supposed to be letting go, when I'm supposed to be untangling this knot of views, I'm reinforcing them. And so developing these little techniques to be mindful of our speech. If those of you who have been around wood, maybe you've heard the term measure twice, cut once. I've adapted that to think twice, act once. So before you click send on that social media post, double think, read it over, think about the possible reactions and consequences to your post. Not enough people do that in society today. They in I don't know what what field it would be that this comes from, but there's a understanding of second and third order consequences of our actions. We don't reflect on the far-reaching consequences of our actions enough. So we should do that. Even on the Buddhist forums, sometimes I want to make a post and I think, it might be beneficial because people like that a monk posts on there, but then I'm just going to get wrapped up in it back and forth, and I don't want to do it. So delete. I don't have time for this. Delete. Right. So this is right speech. Many aspects, nothing has changed, but in modern times with social media, with anonymity, with talking to a picture on a screen with words, we can really lose that. So we have to be extra mindful, extra aware of the time that we're wasting, or the possible reactions and consequences to what we say. Is it worth it? Is it beneficial? And you question yourself with that beforehand, and then chances are you'll have a better idea of really if you should click send on that or not. What about right action? Sammakammanto. This is 3 of the 5 precepts. panatipata, right? Refraining from slaying beings. Then adinadana, refraining from taking what is not given. Kame sumichachara, refraining from sexual misconduct. So again, for the most part, this stuff is pretty universal, right? Refraining from killing beings. This is refraining from killing is a fair bit universal across most religions, across most philosophies. Now, religions and philosophies and ideologies will give certain justifications for when killing is okay. But in general, killing is not necessarily seen as a universal good, especially within in-groups. And so this is nothing new here, really. Killing, is bad 2,600 years ago. It's bad today. And no matter what justifications you might have for killing, it's still all bad karma. There's no good karma that comes from killing. It is very important to understand that. And so that doesn't really make much. In modern times, there's not much of a difference. Now, modern times and modern perspectives, some people will take on a more systemic perception of things, and they'll want to be vegetarian because they feel like they're breaking the first precept by buying meat in the store. And this is not necessarily accurate to the way the Buddha, first did this, but this is one of the things about the precepts. They're not always black and white, and you're not always going to just be able to have somebody answer what is right and wrong for you. Sometimes you have to make a decision. This is what I did for adinadana, right? Refraining from taking what is not given. I can remember before I was a Buddhist, I'd what you call it, download games and movies from like Pirate Bay and do all these I remember back in Netflix. Now I don't think Netflix does this anymore. I'm out of the loop. But back when I had Netflix as a layperson, there wasn't even streaming yet, and you could get a DVD, and I would burn the DVD, do things like this. And it came down. I remember this part of my my path fairly well, because around the same time I started feeling like that was breaking my precept. There were two very well-known monastics who wrote articles stating that they didn't feel that kind of thing was breaking precepts. And while I respected them, I thought they were wrong. And so basically from that point on, I stopped, burning DVDs and downloading games and things like that I didn't pay for. So sometimes you have to kind of read your intuition. And sometimes you have to say, as part of my path, I'm not going to do this. Just like some people might say, as part of my path, I want to be vegetarian. And other people, it doesn't really matter on their path. So this is an important thing to understand. There are nuances in the modern world that make, may complicate things, but this is where you have to, in many ways, take your own initiative to really be honest, sincere with yourself, and see what you feel is the most right thing to do. So, a lot of people, one of the common things today is, you'll hear, oh, my corporation is rich. They won't, doesn't matter if they, I take a few pens or I take this or take that. Yeah, probably doesn't. But the Buddha tells us that even if you are in the middle of nowhere and nobody else is around, there is one person who knows of your bad deeds, you. Right? So it's really not about the corporate, some people have the idea, oh, they're rich people, it doesn't matter, we can take from them, we're justified in doing it. No, you're not. And nor are you helping yourself. You're harming yourself by stealing, by going against the precepts. What other people do, how other people get their money, whatever, things like that, that's not your concern. They have their own karma. But if you allow, this is what, kind of going back to the lying thing, right? Your mind will give you all kinds of justifications for unskillful activities. And you have to be courageous enough and wise enough to notice that, to see that, and to say, no, I see you, Mara. Have you heard this from the suttas? That's what's being said when Mara comes to the Buddha, when Mara comes to the bhikkhus and the bhikkhunis and tries to give them justifications, and they say, who is this? Oh, it's Mara. And they say, I see you, Mara. And Mara goes away dejected. That's a powerful skill for those of us on the Noble Eightfold path, to be able to see Mara. Mara can be very sneaky, and he can come in with all kinds of justifications and things that make you feel, yeah, that's right, exactly, I agree, I'm justified in doing this. I'm the righteous one. I'm the moral one. Right? All of these really shaky justifications for doing really unskillful things. You're only hurting yourself. Or you might hurt others too, but really you're only hurting. You're mainly hurting yourself. You're setting yourself up for suffering in the future. And so a wise person would say, nah, I'm not going to do this. And then sexual misconduct. This is another one. Again, as we go through these, there's not that much of a change. Sometimes there is, and I'm highlighting when I see there's a major change. Oh, what is sexual misconduct? The Buddha gives us the list. Engaging in sexual activity with those who are protected by their family. That could be minors, unmarried people, especially in ancient times. Men and women stayed with their family, until they were married, things like that. So minors, unmarried people, people who have mental, illnesses, that they're unable to make consent for themselves, these kind of things. And then those who are married. Back in the Buddha's day, back in this, or maybe some of you listening grew up in a small village. When something like an adultery happened in a small village, that can have a huge impact on that small village. These days, when millions of people are living together and nobody knows their neighbor, that aspect is probably not there. But these kind of things still have a great impact on the individual family. So it's still something important to reflect on and to avoid doing. And also those who are engaged, that's also sexual misconduct. Those who are protected by their Dhamma, so trying to seduce bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, engaging in sexual activity with bhikkhu and bhikkhunis, not good. Not good for both parties. And then those who are entail punishment. So whatever the government says in terms of punishment. And so, I think this is a pretty clear cut thing. The Buddha, there's kind of unskillful behaviors, like, addiction to porn or something like that. And I don't mean just like looking at porn. I mean like people who do it like 10 hours a day. Like there's, like games, and addicted to all kinds of other things. But obviously, these are modern problems. But when it comes to sexual misconduct, I think it's pretty clear and concise. The idea in general is using your sexuality in a skillful way, right? Not using your sexuality in an unskillful way. And then right livelihood. Right livelihood is very simple. Buddha didn't give much, didn't give a lot of for instances with the right livelihood. Giving up wrong livelihood, one engages in right livelihood. Right? Very simple. Samma ajivo. And you might wonder, well, why doesn't the Buddha be more specific? Well, there is one little sutta where he's a bit more specific, but it's a pretty, I mean, people know about it, but if you look in the suttas, it's one little small sutta in the middle of thousands of suttas. It's fairly obscure in general. And I'll talk about that in a second, but I think it's important to understand that the Buddha had to leave this open. Even at the time of the Buddha, there were many ways of making a living. Now there's exponentially more as we become more specialized. Markets have been bigger, more items, right? To create and to sell and all these kind of things. Ways to make a living. Now you can be a YouTuber, right? And things like that. You can make a living in all kinds of ways. You can make a living playing sports, right? All of these are more modern inventions. This is not part of the time of the Buddha. And so the idea is to make a living in a way that's skillful, and if not beneficial to yourself and others, at least not harmful. So again, that again puts the ball in your court. In modern times, it gets complicated. I remember at Bhavana Society when I started teaching retreats and started doing interviews with people. A common one that would come up is, I work for X corporation, and my side of the corporation does really good things, but the other side of the corporation does really bad things. Is that wrong livelihood? And going by the suttas and what the Buddha says in the early texts, I have to say, no. What are you doing? Right? What the company is doing on the other end is not is not your wrong livelihood. But some people, and investigating and thinking about it, they say, I can't in good conscience work for this company, even though with what I'm doing for the company is doing good. So this is again where you have to, be okay making some nuanced decisions. What are you doing? What is the company you're working for doing? Does that matter? Does it not? Trying to think of other modern concerns in this. One of the, obviously, there's 5 businesses. And again, this was in ancient times, the same people who made the product also sold the product. Right now it's more specialized. But there's 5 businesses where the Buddha said, if you're a Buddhist, you probably should avoid these professions. Right? What are they? making and selling alcohol. And someone might say, I work for a restaurant, I'm a server, and I give people alcohol. Is that breaking the precepts? It's a good question. I would probably lean towards no, because that's not all you're doing. But even if you worked at a bar, you're not making it. You're an employee there. It could go either way. It's interesting. That's another thing where you make your choice. So making and selling alcohol, making and selling weapons, making and selling poisons, taking people into slavery and selling slaves, and being a butcher. So killing animals and selling the meat. So these are 5 professions where the Buddha says if you're a Buddhist practitioner, you should probably avoid these. So again, you work at a supermarket. The supermarket sells meat. Is that wrong livelihood? I would probably incline towards no, as long as you're not killing the animals, but some people might think so. So you have to, be able to have the courage and the determination to be able to make that choice for yourself. And to circle back a little bit to what we were saying before in the beginning, ajivo can mean what you do to make a living, but it also can mean how you live. And so if you are on the Arya Pariyesana, if you are on the noble quest, if you are dedicatedly and sincerely trying to become an avatar of the Noble Eightfold Path, that is also Samma Ajivo. That's right living. Because the Noble Eightfold Path can be your guide. Right? The Noble Eightfold Path and the Buddha's teachings can be your guide in how you choose to live and act. To become an avatar of the path is really true Samma Ajivo. And then the last 3 are, I can probably group them together in terms of meditation. Right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. This is meditation is very old. Doing these practices is very old. Both men and women and lay people and monastics have been doing these practices for a long, long time. And in the time of the Buddha, in the early texts in the suttas, you can see that even lay people were doing these meditative practices. The Buddha never, ever, ever says in the early text, this is only what lay people do, this is what monastics do. If lay people were up for, doing some deeper meditation, he taught them. That this is very clear. Meditation is part of the path, just as generosity and morality or virtue are part of the path. They're all part of the path together. So this is why doing these meditative practices are very important. Right effort. Samma vayamo. This is honestly, dedicatedly, sincerely, or as they say in the sutras, diligently, ardently, and resolute. Abandoning what is unskillful and developing what is skillful. Making the dedicated effort with the mindset of, from this day forward, my goal is to, and this is what the Noble Eightfold Path does. When you follow the Noble Eightfold Path, you abandon the unskillful and you develop the skillful. Noble Eightfold Path is developing skillfulness. And you have the mindset, you get up in the morning and you say, I'm going to abandon unskillfulness and develop skillfulness today. And your success rate will be varied depending on a variety of causes and conditions, and that's okay. But you started out with the idea, with the goal, with the aspiration. Today I will abandon the unskillful and develop the skillful. And the whole Noble Eightfold Path does that. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood. All of those do that just as much as the next two, right mindfulness and right concentration, do. So having that mindset of, I am following the Noble Eightfold Path. This is not just something I do, but part of who I am. And every day, I'm developing the skillful and abandoning the unskillful, even if it's just in the smallest little increments every day. That is what I'm doing. And as I am doing that, the Buddha gives us various tools for investigating our experience, for understanding the nature of reality. This is sammasati, right mindfulness. Samma samadhi, right stillness or concentration, however you want to translate it. The stilling and the calming of the mind, and the investigating all phenomena to see the true nature of reality. These two things work together so that you can understand reality and free yourself from your delusions. These are also timeless. People might say today, Bhante, I don't have time to meditate. I don't have time for this. I don't have time for that. You read the suttas. You see that the lay people, they'll come and they'll talk to the Buddha and they say, now we must go, for we have no little time and there is much to do. Same excuse as ever. Same excuse as ever. And that line of thinking doesn't work on me. It might work on somebody like Bhante Ji, right? Or somebody who has been a monk since they were very young, who really hasn't lived in the world and had a career. It might work for them. You that excuse. Bhante, it's so busy in life, yada, yada, yada. But I had a crazy busy life with a crazy busy career that kept me out at all hours of the night. And my practice developed and flourished during that time. So you can't fool me. Your excuses do not work here. Everybody, no matter what their situation, can develop the Noble Eightfold Path, can practice mindfulness, satipatthana, and maybe less than other parts of the path if you are really, really busy, but you can also practice samadhi, samma samadhi. You can practice sitting down, following your breath, even if it's 10 minutes a day. You can do it. You can find time. I'm so busy. Modern life is so busy. No. Ancient times was busy too. Busy surviving. Where are we going to get the food that we need to eat? We got to do the crops. Even in modern times, farming is like a 24/7, 365 job. I've stayed on farms. It's exhausting, hard, all day work, right? So ancient times, people were busy too. And not only did they have to worry about lots of work, they had to worry about robbers and bandits and invading armies and all kinds of stuff like this. So you're not special in the modern world with all your quote unquote busyness. It's just how it is. But when you develop the path, you'll find ways, you'll find time, because it will become more of a priority for you. Other things will not be as much a priority. You'll choose to go to the monastery more. You'll choose to, instead of doing this, why don't I sit and meditate for 10 minutes? You have what in modern times they call found time. You're sitting you're waiting on a line, you're, driving home from work, or whatever. Guess what? That's time you can do some practice. That's time you can do some meditation. You'll find the time. You'll find the opportunities. They're all there. It's just not as much of a priority for you yet. But when it becomes more of a priority, time will be there. You'll be able to do it, especially Satipatthana, foundations of mindfulness, because you can do that with whatever else you're doing. You can do your 8-hour, work day or 10 or 12 or 14, which was often the case for me when emergencies and being out late at my child protective service job. And you could always have the ability and the opportunity, as long as you're awake, to practice. It's more about mindset. It's more about choosing to really live the path and to become an avatar of it, and understanding that it's not separate from how you live. It's part of how you live. And so however you live, however you're existing, you can follow this path. You can develop it. Anything else is just excuses, lying to yourself, justifications. You can do it. It's only a matter of how much you want to and how much of a priority it is. All right, friends. I think I've yapped on long enough. But that's a little bit of the Noble Eightfold Path in daily life. So now we can have time for questions. So if you have any questions about the topic of today, about how, your struggles and successes in living the path in your daily life, about anything related to Buddhism, meditation, monasticism, etc., you're free to ask questions in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer them. Let's see. Hello, Metika. Hello, Wheel of Wisdom. Sud. Wasabi. Yankee. Laxman. Nilung. Tony. Krishna. Putrika. Oh, friends. So this is an interesting question. Did Buddha give up Hinduism in order to seek enlightenment? I've always wondered about this. So Hinduism didn't exist at the time of the Buddha. As far as I can understand, Hinduism is a kind of amalgamation of all the traditions in India over thousands of years. So Hinduism, as we know it, didn't really exist. The area that the Buddha's stomping grounds, as it were, the the main leading group was the Brahmins. Right? And I don't think it's, even though much of Brahmanical culture, like the Rig Vedas and all that stuff, are part of Hinduism today, I don't think it's accurate to equate the two. I think they're they're two different. They're the same in some ways and different in many other ways. So what I would say is that the Buddha used his society and the wisdom of his society to go as far as he could, but it wasn't enough to go all the way to awakening. So the rest he had to follow that ancient path and find it for himself and then proclaim it. No, he learned, he practiced and learned from teachers of the time, Samana teachers, Alara Kalama, Udaka Ramaputta. He practiced many meditative techniques, like their rupa attainments, formless attainments, jhanas, etc. He practiced many techniques that were existing there in the time and the place. But the last step was not in that society. The last step of satipatthana, that wasn't in there. That's what the Buddha found. That's the Buddha's gift to the world, satipatthana, the foundations of mindfulness. So I wouldn't say that the Buddha gave up on Hinduism to seek enlightenment. He took what that culture, he took that culture to the max of what their wisdom was, and then he had to go the rest of the way by himself. Sud is always good for a couple questions. Dear Bhante, does trying to bring metta into the mind in every situation equivalent to practicing samasati and samasamadhi? If you are to bring something to mind in every situation, requires a base level of samasati. Obviously, yeah, it requires a base level of mindfulness. Don't forget that one of the aspects of mindfulness is recollecting. The Buddha talks about this in the suttas. He remembers what has been said before. He recalls and remembers the teachings. So you have to remember to be mindful. And to do that, you have to build it up as a habit. So if you're trying to bring metta to the mind in every situation, that is an ancillary mindfulness practice. It means it might not be a full mindfulness practice because you're developing metta, but bringing metta to the fore in a situation requires some mindfulness. This is why the Karaniya Metta Sutta, the Buddha says, one should develop this mindfulness. I wouldn't say it's equivalent to the totality of developing mindfulness. It's just one aspect of mindfulness. It's one aspect of the path. There's much more to practicing sammasati than trying to remember to bring metta to every situation. Same thing with samma samadhi. Ooh, excuse me. I got in from my flight at like 1 o'clock in the morning last night, so I'm not running on a full night's sleep. All right, let's see. Hello, Bhumika. All right, well, I don't see any questions. I will give it another minute or two to see if questions come up, and then we'll move from there. Brian says, hey, Bhante, in regards to the fourth foundation of mindfulness, can you please explain it in short? And how should one practice it in meditation? So if the four foundations of mindfulness are like equated to a toolbox, which I like to do, the fourth foundation of mindfulness is like a mini toolbox within the larger toolbox. No, you're not boring me. I'm just reaching the end of my tiredness, or the beginning of my tiredness, I should say. So the fourth satipatthana has been previously translated as mind objects. And that's not I don't like that translation. Even when I first heard it, and even Bhante G, my preceptor, used mind objects back in the day. Now he's switched to I'm blanking out. He translates it the same as Bhante Analio and Bhikkhu Bodhi, and they've all kind of changed their perception of it. Principles is the term. Bhante Sujato I think also uses principles. But back in the day, it was translated as mind objects. And that's just me. I remember trying to like figure out why. Like, where does mind objects, like looking at what's part of that and look at mind objects. What does this mean? And then thankfully I saw the new translations are like, this makes much more sense. Because the fourth, unlike the three before, body, feeling, mind, the fourth satipatthana includes all of the other three. You can in the sections of the fourth satipatthana, you can see that you're investigating body, feeling, and mind. So it's not its own separate thing. The reason why I like the term principles is because if you look at what's in the fourth satipatthana, you understand that these are the various principles that the Buddha has given for us to investigate our experience. The five aggregates: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, right? The Buddha tells us that this is all there is. Right? Everything that we think of as me, mine, myself is added on or viewed wrongly. Five aggregates is all we are, right? So that's one of the things to reflect and investigate our experience through. The five hindrances, right? The five major things that hinder us from getting into deep samadhi, into jhanas. The six senses: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Right? That right there, you have the body, you have the feeling, you have the mind. Right there. And then the Four Noble Truths. Investigating your experience through the Four Noble Truths. This is suffering. Why am I suffering? Oh, there's the craving. Can I stop it? Can I stop suffering? Ah, yes, I've let go. The suffering's gone. Right? And then the 7 factors of awakening. So the fourth satipatthana is most rightly called principles because within that you see the principles, not all the principles, obviously. The Buddha can't put every one of his principles in that one section, but these are principles for investigating your experience. That's the fourth satipatthana. So in that way, it's different than the other three. You can't. There's no phenomena that is the fourth satipatthana that you investigate. These are all aspects of different ways of investigating your experience. All right. Bhante, can you speak on walking as a practice to cultivate sammasati? Sure. Well, when you do walking, it's very similar to when you're following your breath, in terms of that you're trying to focus on your object, right? Your object while you're doing walking is focusing on the feeling of the feet. And you can do, you know, you can do satipatthana while you're even following your breath. But the Buddha says in Anapanasati Sutta that foundations of the mindfulness of breathing fulfills the 4 foundations of mindfulness. 4 foundations of mindfulness fulfills the 7 factors of awakening. So you can do, while you're sitting and following your breath, you can be practicing also samasati. When you're walking, it's the same. If you're new to walking and you're walking outside, there's a lot of distractions. So you might have more practice, with distractions. You might feel the wind on your skin and all these kind of different things, noises, etc., so that you get more distracted and so that you're practicing more satipatthana than you are, samadhi per se. And you can also just make walking just about, the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Walking meditation doesn't necessarily need to be just following the feet. You can even do metta with walking meditation. And each time you step, your waves of metta go out to all beings, things like that. But if you are paying attention to the feet, the feeling of the feet pressing against the floor and the lifting, the moving of the tendons in the lower legs, the calves, you can pay close attention to all of these things, and you can learn a lot from them. Yeah, Bhante, I was told it's very difficult, next to impossible in lay life, to achieve metta ceto vimutti because of how busy a life is as a layperson. Do you know if this is true? Metta ceto vimutti is release of mind through metta. If you're practicing metta and you have no ill will in your mind, even if it's for 10 seconds, you have metta ceto vimutti. Ceto vimutti is both a temporary thing, it can be temporary, and it also can be permanent. But it's usually only permanent once you become an arahant. Otherwise, it's impermanent. Buddha tells us quite clearly, metta is impermanent. 1 second you have a mind full of metta, the next second your metta has hidden, you don't know where it is, and you're agitated and angry. And you start doing unskillful things. So I don't know if somebody's told you that metta ceto vimutti is some kind of permanent attainment or something like that, but that's not what it is. Ceto vimutti you can experience in many different ways all throughout the day. In fact, the Buddha in Satipatthana, in various ways, the Buddha tells us we have to know when something is arising, when something is there, and when something is not. It's just as important to recognize when something is not there as when it is there. Because when you recognize when it's not there, you might have a chance of figuring out why it's not there. What are the causes, conditions to arise that I have metta ceto vimutti right now? There's no ill will in my mind right now. What are the causes and conditions that cause that? Both are important to know when something's there, when it's not there, why it's there, and why it's not there. So is metta ceto vimutti different than jhana in metta? Yeah, I would say so. Metta Chaito Vimutti does not equal jhana. You can have, there's Chaito Vimutti and jhana. You temporarily subdue Vitaka Vichara. You temporarily subdue Piti Sukha. You temporarily subdue likes and dislikes. Somanasa Domanasa. You temporarily subdue Dukkha Sukha, pleasure and pain. These are all Chaito Vimutti for a time. The Buddha doesn't call that Chaito Vimutti, but you shouldn't. Chaito Vimutti is not like some kind of specific technique. It is literally just release of mind or liberation of mind. And in most cases in the suttas, this is something that's temporary, not permanent. Hello, Brian, Nimala, Chani. Oh, hey, Jay. Jay has a good point. Just a reflection. Busy people always find time for bodily hygiene, like having a shower and brushing their teeth. So surely they can find 10 minutes for mental hygiene doing some meditation. Sure, you can also do mindfulness while brushing your teeth and taking a shower, right? You can multitask. This is the only actual multitasking in reality. In reality, it's a myth that people can actually multitask. But you can practice mindfulness while doing all of your daily activities. All right. Hello, Shrishti. So we'll give it another minute or two to see if any questions come up. And if nothing, then we'll call it a night. Like I said, I'm covering Wednesdays for the next for the rest of the month. So I'll be doing the next 2 Wednesdays. Topics, who knows? If you have a topic you'd like me to discuss, feel free to send me a message or an email or something like that. Maybe that'll be something for me to talk about. All right, friends. So I think we can call it a night. Suki Hotu, may you be well and at ease. Practice well and be well. May you have a spiritually successful and peaceful practice until we meet again, which, if I'm alive, might be next Wednesday. Have a good week.